Experience of trauma and PTSD symptoms in autistic adults. Risk of PTSD development following DSM-5 and non-DSM-5 traumatic life events. This is a study from April 2020. Research to date suggests that individuals with autistic spectrum disorder (ASD) may be at increased risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder following exposure to traumatic life events. It has been posited that characteristics of ASD may affect perceptions of trauma, with a wider range of life events acting as possible catalysts for PTSD development. The study set out to explore the nature of trauma for adults with ASD and the rates of self-reported PTSD symptomatology following DSM-5 and non-DSM-5 traumas, the latter being defined as those that would not meet the standard DSM-5 PTS trauma criterion A. 59 adults with ASD who reported exposure to traumatic events took part in the study, which involved completing a series of online questionnaires. 33 individuals reported experiencing a DSM-5 traumatic event, and 35 reported a non-DSM-5 traumatic event. Trauma-exposed ASD adults were found to be at increased risk of PTSD development. If you are familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experience study by Kaiser Permanente through Felitti and Anda in 1995 to 1997, based on the prevalence of adversities they had seen in the obesity program, Felitti and Anda sorted their definitions of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction into 10 specific categories of ACEs. Their goal was to determine each patient's level of exposure by asking if he or she had experienced any of the 10 categories before the age of 80. So those 10 are emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, substance abuse in the household, for example, living with an alcoholic or a person with a substance abuse problem. So my dad was a functional alcoholic and my mother was an addict of pain medication. So that's for sure one that applies to my case. Then there is mental illness in the household, living with someone who suffered from depression or mental illness or who had attempted suicide. So my mother was definitely depressed. That was another issue. Therefore, she was emotionally not available. Mother treated violently. Yes, my dad, at least once that I witnessed it personally, beat my mother, and that was the worst day in my life at age 13. And that was completely independent from being autistic. That was real trauma happening through an abusive household. And then 9, there is divorce or parental separation, and 10, criminal behavior in households. Now, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris scores additional points. She has those listed in her book because what she writes, our research team worked actively with the community, youth and adults to learn what the greatest stressors were in their day-to-day lives. Informed by these insights, we reworked our screening tool to include other factors that we believe may also increase the risk of toxic stress. So one is community violence, homelessness, discrimination, foster care, bullying, repeated medical procedures or life-threatening illness, death of caregiver, loss of caregiver due to deportation or migration, youth incarceration, verbal or physical violence from a romantic partner. And now, in my opinion, there should be an additional score for autistic trauma. Bullying would be certainly one, but then there is a lot that neurotypicals don't have an issue with, but autistics do, and they really can be traumatized by that, and as a result develop PTSD. Adults with ASD reported a broad range of life events as traumatic, with both DSM-5 Criterion A events and non-DSM-5 non-Criterion A events traumas being identified as catalysts to self-reported PTSD symptomatology and probable PTSD symptom scores crossing cutoff on the PCL-5. The most commonly reported DSM-5 traumas were sexual and physical abuse, whereas bullying, bereavement, and traumas relating to mental health problems such as breakdowns were the most common non-DSM-5 traumas. Previous research illustrates that non-Criterion A events can also act as catalysts for PTSD development in the general population. Comparing non-DSM-5 traumas reported in previous general population studies to those found in our group of ASD adults, possible novel non-DSM-5 traumas in ASD may include the ASD diagnostic process, experience of therapy, because unfortunately therapists and doctors and so-called experts can really traumatize an ASD person. It seemed we were ignoring a huge part of the picture. The more the researchers look, the more we see that many autistics have post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, in my own work as a therapist and as an advocate of the autism community, I have met only one person with autism who does not have PTSD. Sadly, autism does increase the risk of trauma. The fact that we are bullied, teased, ostracized, and misunderstood more than neurotypicals, and that we are more sensitive to these events, is what explains the high prevalence of PTSD in autistic people. Autistics get post-traumatic stress disorder PTSD more often than neurotypicals for a number of reasons. First, because social skills are confusing to them, they are more likely to be bullied and abused, which thus makes them more vulnerable to developing PTSD. In fact, it has been suggested that autism is likely a vulnerability marker for PTSD by increasing the risk for exposure to traumatic events, in part due to our sensitivities, but the way our brain works also makes it more likely for us to get PTSD. The reptilian brain is the most primitive part of our brain, and its main function is to protect us. Our meltdowns and shutdowns occur because of this part of our brain. The reptilian brain gives us 4 options: fight, flight, freeze, or submit, which is fawn. Reduced connectivity between brain hemispheres has been linked to autism, with the connectivity in the following regions relating to the extent of autistic traits: the bilateral posterior cingulate, which is involved in pain and episodic memory retrieval; the insula, which plays a role in consciousness. It's involved in compassion and empathy, perception, motor control, self-awareness, cognitive function, and interpersonal experience. The superior temporal gyrus, which is involved in the processing of sounds and the perception of emotions in facial stimuli connections. The guard. Information coming into the brain goes to the guard of the brain first. The guard is known as the amygdala. What the amygdala does is decide if what we are experiencing is a threat or not. If what we experience is seen as a threat, then down to the reptilian part of the brain we go, where we have the options of fight, flight, freeze, or submit, fawn. In most people, once the threat is over, the brain then sends the information to the left side of the brain, where we apply logic and language. Once we can speak about something in a coherent way, then we are able to process it and let it go. The differences in our brain do 2 things. One is that our overconnectivity causes us to go round and round and round, which results in us being obsessive, and we keep looping information. To the best of the author's knowledge, no published research to date has systematically explored the experience of non-predefined non-DSM-5 traumas in ASD and the rates of associated PTSD symptomatology, although a population-based study of the prevalence of trauma exposure and PTSD development in ASD would be ideal. A more limited exploration of a volunteer sample of trauma-exposed adults with ASD has a role at this point in expanding the currently very limited knowledge base in this important field of inquiry, and laying the groundwork for such large-scale research projects. So, what I think is really important during autism evaluation, automatically every autistic should be tested for PTSD as well. This is because for the necessary support and also healing of trauma, you need additional therapies that address the nervous system, such as neurofeedback, EMDR, somatic experience, craniosacral therapy, because talk therapy will not do it. Trauma isn't cognitive. Trauma is stored in the body, in the cells. Therefore, talking will not really heal trauma. It can even re-traumatize you. You might trigger a flashback. Traumatic experiences change the way our brain functions and how we see the world. Research shows that when we are traumatized, our central nervous system is set to cope with our past traumatic event rather than what is happening in the present. When you've been traumatized, your body becomes stuck in fear and terror. Dr. Van der Kolk offers us effective ways to overcome this suffering and refocus our mind and regulate our body. We discover how the brain is affected when we are traumatized, helping us to develop a deeper understanding of the nature of trauma. Dr. Van der Kolk explains the effects trauma can have on our brain and how we can rewire our brain through new experiences and technologies, offering us relief from chronic fear and making our brain more attentive and effective. A person who experiences childhood trauma can experience problems with their balance and coordination. Dr. Van der Kolk says that people who have PTSD can experience following symptoms: feeling out of touch with surroundings, having emotional reactions that seem to come out of nowhere, feeling triggered or numbed out. Dr. Van der Kolk discusses why memories of our past trauma keep returning and explains that the effect this has on our brain. He offers techniques and skills to help elevate ourselves from these painful memories. Dr. Van der Kolk shows us how EMDR, yoga, tapping, acupressure, and acupuncture, which are all useful practices that help widen our window of tolerance. Why would we want to widen the window of tolerance? Because then we feel grounded, we are flexible, we are open, we are curious, we are present, and we are able to emotionally self-regulate, assist our minds functioning, and help us feel calm and safe in our body.
When trauma happens, its impact is generally felt in the body first. That's why working with the body can be crucial for helping patients heal from a traumatic experience. But sometimes, even just being aware of their bodies can make some trauma survivors feel re-traumatized. So how can we help them move beyond the fear or anxiety that the body often holds? According to Dr. Pat Ogden, there's one thing in particular that could give patients a new perspective.
It's highly individual depending on the client. Some clients are very afraid to even be aware of their body because as soon as they become aware, they feel re-traumatized. They feel all the fear and they feel the arousal. They might start to shake, and they don't see a way through that. Right? So sometimes psychoeducation can really help. That a normal response of the body is to tighten up and freeze and shake when there's trauma. And those responses are natural with trauma, and we can work with those through physical action, through re-engaging protective mechanisms in the body. Sometimes a little bit of psychoeducation goes a long way. Some clients are phobic of the term body, and even using that term sends their arousal out of the window. So we might talk in a different way. We might talk about experience or movement instead of body. Other clients need what we would call somatic resources, like one patient that I had, severe trauma, highly dissociative. When she sat down, she couldn't really focus. She was so frightened. And her legs were really tight and she kept looking at the door. And so we simply got up and started walking around the office. And I asked her just to feel the power of her legs, like that her legs could take her away. Anytime she wanted, she could walk out that door. And to really feel that in her body. When she sat back down, she said, I feel really different. Because although she intellectually knew, of course, that she could walk out, she didn't have that somatic sense of her legs being able to flee. Because as a child, she was a prisoner of her abuser. She couldn't flee. She couldn't get away. So sometimes those kinds of resources can then open up the safety that's needed to work with the body. I tell people that you need to find out from your clients why they're so frightened of their body, and then find a way to, with psychoeducation or somatic resources or case examples, to help them feel hopeful.
So curiosity is one of the emergent properties of ventral vagal, and that means that when you're in a ventral vagal state, curiosity arises. When you're in sympathetic or dorsal, you do not have access to your curiosity. So when you're in ventral and you feel some curiosity, that then increases your ventral, and it creates this beautiful feedback loop, so that I'm there and I feel a moment of curiosity, and then I feel more ventral and more curiosity. And right now in the world, we can get so pulled out of curiosity. We can get so pulled out of an anchor in ventral and feel sympathetically charged. I have to do something now. I don't know what to do. Get me out of here. Or that dorsal despair. And I think most people are fluctuating between the two in loops now, over and over and over. And so the question, when you're creating a connection plan, what would I like to explore, is sort of a prompt that reminds you that you do have access to ventral, and that your curiosity still lives there. And in this time of our lives, I think having something written on paper that when you read it brings that memory of curiosity is very helpful, because we can get so stuck in those other states. So a lot of this work, the connection plan, making your social engagement continuum, any of these things that we're doing are sort of pre-planning. You do them when you have a moment, when you feel regulated enough that you want to sit down and bring some curiosity, which then means you have enough ventral to move ahead with these things. And then you've done them and you put them somewhere where you can have access to them. Because when you're getting pulled out, you don't have prefrontal cortex energy to help you. And you don't remember that, I do have access to my curiosity. So yeah, it's actually fun to do when you're feeling enough curiosity to do it, and then it's there for you to grab onto when you need it. Compassion is another emergent property of ventral, which I think comes after curiosity. So I think if we can find curiosity, then we can go to compassion, and then to self-compassion. And all three of those are incredibly needed in the world right now.
So even just taking those few moments was enough to let her be helpful. And then also other people on the team noticed it. And so she guided them with some of these exercises after their shifts. So the whole group of people around the emergency room were doing these kind of exercises. This is an exercise which is really helpful when you have a sensation that seems strong. Very, very simple exercise, but very powerful. But also Previsio, it can bring up different, it could bring up different emotions, and of course the sensations. It definitely bring up different sensations. But the idea is to take an easy, full breath, and on the exhalation, to make the sound boo, as though it's coming from the gut, coming from the viscera. And then allowing the breath and the sound to go all the way out. And then allowing a new breath to come in, filling the belly and the chest. And then again, continue the voo sound, directing the vibration from the belly. And anybody who, is watching this online, you're invited. Again, just to know it can bring up certain feelings and emotions, and of course sensations that, that may have been there for a long time, but not acknowledge them. So again, I take an easy full breath, and on the exhalation make the sound woo, coming from the belly, and sustaining the sound and the woo, letting the breath and the sound go all the way out, then allowing the new breath to come in, filling belly, then chest, and again. So, vibrating it down here to the belly. And just rest and notice sensations, feelings, thoughts, images, and returning then to the sensation. So noticing the images or thoughts and then coming back to the body sensation. And just doing that as an exercise.
Since in a state of freeze, they're telling you that they are recruiting two defense systems. They're recruiting a mobilization system and an immobilization system. And they're basically just staying alive. They're not, in a sense, doing anything other than just attempting to survive. And the only way to kind of get people out of that is really through what I would say cues of safety. Now, you can't give them cues of safety in the traditional sense of direct face-to-face eye contact because their nervous system will respond to that as intrusiveness because of proximity. They don't want anything proximal to them. However, the reduction of stimulation might be helpful, make the room quieter. The enhancement of intonation in one's voice might be helpful. Basically, the nervous system is overwhelmed with cues of defense, and the only way to turn that off is to do two different things. Remove cues of activity and energy and potentially intrusiveness, and to try to sneak in cues of safety, which would be intonation of voice, would be the only way you could do it, or one of the only ways you could do it. And that would be perhaps with vocal music, perhaps just kind of like quieting the place down. So if the person's in those states, you might, in a sense, start using a more hypersonic voice, almost, but being very careful not to mimic how you talk to babies or cats and dogs, because the person might see that as being minimizing or dismissive of who they are. So you want to, in a sense, change how you are breathing in the presence of another. You want the breaths to be calmer. You want to give signals that you are safe and that you're not angry or disappointed in them. Remember, when the body is in that state, that body is in a state of profound autonomic defense. So it's looking for a cue to disappear even more. So to change or reach a person in a freeze state is, I'm going to say it's almost a hypothetical question because it is a difficult task to achieve. Because we are human beings, and what that means is we have sensitivities to triggers as well. And if a person who is next to us is in a state of freeze, they're sending cues to us that our body really doesn't like. So we have to, in a sense, move into a very strange state, which is a state of both self-compassion, where we acknowledge that we are a human being reacting to those cues, and a sense of compassion for the client or for the person who you're trying to be helpful to. And once you get into this other sense of the ability of both self-compassion and understanding of your own reactions and a respect for the reactions of the others, then you can kind of override those bodily feelings and you start realizing that your role is to de-escalate that individual's defense systems. In a sense, it's almost like a Star Trek metaphor, where they're using energy shields to protect the starship.
Okay, I'm going to get up on my haunches here. Okay, here you take your right hand and you put it here under your left arm on the side of the heart. Yeah, got it. And the other hand on the shoulder. And just to get a feeling, Ruth and everybody else who's watching, what this feels like, what the sensation is like, not just of your hands, but of what's going on inside of your body. Most people report a settling. What this does, I believe, is it helps us become aware of our container. See, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more, the body is the container of all of our sensations and all of our feelings. It's all in the body. And this is the container of the body, is the kind of the outside of our body, our shoulders, the sides of our thorax and so forth. And when the person can feel the container, then the emotions and the sensations do not feel as overwhelming because they're being contained. Another very simple thing people can do, usually I suggest they do this one first. The second one is just putting their hand on their forehead and the other hand on their upper chest. And just to wait, they can do this with their eyes open or closed, whatever they feel more comfortable with. A lot of people like to do it with their eyes closed, or others don't feel safe enough. To just feel what goes on between the hands. Sometimes they'll feel like an energy flow or a change in temperature or a feeling. And I just ask them just to keep their hands there. It could be just a few moments. It could be 5 or 10 minutes until they feel some kind of a shift. And then to take the upper hand here, keep the lower hand on the chest, and then put this hand on the belly. And again, just wait until there's some shift, till there's some flow. And sometimes people, if they're unable to sleep or they're afraid they're going to have nightmares, if they do simple things like that, they fall into sleep much better, and often the dreams are much more useful dreams. There are other techniques, the tapping, the energy, psychology kinds of things. For some people that works very well. Other people, you can use like tapping. Another thing I suggest is actually literally tapping the skin all over so you get a sense of the boundary, because traumatized people, there's a hole in their boundary. So as you kind of help the body remember that it is the container, then they feel more able to deal with their sensations and their emotions. Also squeezing the muscles, different parts of the body, also helps with sense of boundary.
So our job is to learn to be in the window of tolerance so we can tolerate all the crap that happens around us and to tolerate all the crap that comes from inside. And so we need to become still and learn how to do that. It's really remarkable that yoga can help you with that, and Tai Chi can help you with that, and then people started to tap, and tapping can help you with that. I can show you the way that I tap. Some people may tell you, oh, he's doing it wrong, you should do something else. My answer to that always is, show me your data. If you can prove that what you do is better than what I do, excellent, do it your way. But there isn't much science at this point that really has discovered what the right way of doing things is. So maybe someday we will. Right now, what we do is when we tap, we start off tapping the back of our palm of our hand, and the Chinese call this a reversal point. From a Western point of view, I have no idea what the reversal point means, because nobody has ever shown any pathways in the brain or the body that gets reversed. But hey, they call it reversal points, so what the hell. And then you tap over here between your 4th and 5th metaphalanx, it's called, and that also the Chinese say that calms something down in the body. Again, no proof for it right now, but it does seem to help. And then you tap what we call the superciliary ridge, right here. And just tap there. Tap there. And as you do that, just notice your breathing, notice how you feel, notice how your body feels. You may notice a little shift, and maybe nothing. Don't worry about it. And then you tap your zygomatic arch, right over here. And you'll find that if you do this fairly regularly, on different days, different parts of what you tap have a slightly different effect. I did this yesterday with a bunch of people, and I noticed a very strong effect. And I tapped here. Today I don't feel anything. Next place here, underneath the eye sockets. Just notice what you feel. Tap your upper lip. Tap your lower lip. Tap your acupressure point number 27, 1 inch below your collarbone on either side of your sternum. Tap over here, between your 11 and 12 rib. And then I tap over here. If you meet other people who tap differently, that's just fine. If you like those people, you trust them, do it their way. If you like me and trust me, do it my way. It doesn't matter. But tapping can be quite helpful. It's likely that if you tap with me, you feel a shift in your body.
When the nervous system has been hijacked by trauma, it's crucial to resource patients with these kinds of body-oriented techniques. And when we do that, we're giving patients the tools they need to feel safe, not just when they're with us in our office, but also so that they can restore their own sense of safety.